We're good now? All right.
So I got it. It's very important. I've already had one full thermos today, so.
I mean,
Is my heart gonna explode? Maybe.
class is important. The online stuff is important, but it's coffee. I mean, hello.
Didn't you preach about that Sunday? I think I heard you say something about coffee Sunday.
I said something about caffeine.
I was in the nursery and I heard that.
Yeah. Because my wife said, I don't care if it is an addiction. I ain't giving it up.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Because somebody said there were hey, yeah. Well,
There could be worse. There could be worse.
And, Amanda in the nursery, because her little boy didn't stay without mama. And so she said, did he just say coffee? Yeah, I think so.
I mean, for a long time, I was addicted to Coke Zeros. So, Dr. Pepper before that. So, I know.
I used to have a diet Dr. Pepper. I mean, I remember being in the door and going down to the machine.
Mm-hmm.
Your diet Dr. Pepper.
Was that back when it was? There was a time. No. I'm not talking about.
Yeah, I had glass.
No. I'm talking about the cans.
The machine was one of those kind that's a big chest and you had to.
But was it the blue that was called sugar-free Dr. Pepper? You remember those? Because used to Dr. Pepper just had like the normal can and it was a blue can that said sugar-free Dr. Pepper, and then they switched to the white that was diet Dr. Pepper. Do you remember that? I drank from the bottles too. I'm just saying it was blue. Okay. All right. I know a lot about sodas. The used to be sugar-free Dr. Pepper. Before they called it diet. Oh man, I'm gonna have to.
No, it wasn't blue. The bottle can or whatever was blue.
Yep. I'm gonna look it up now.
I remember diet Dr. Pepper, but I don't remember.
I think Coca can was blue.
You remember our Coca-Cola?
Right. No, RC. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved RC Cola.
Yeah, the pizza place we used to get pizza from served RC. So like for me, like that's like a childhood memory of like House of Pizza and RC Cola.
Well, usually if they had RC Cola, they had knee-high drinks too. Remember knee-high drinks?
I drink Dr. Thunder.
Yeah, but they had everything under that. Orange and strawberry and grape and yeah.
Dr. Pepper, I drink
Not
Dr.
gonna do
Pepper.
it.
You all must be older than me because I don't remember any color cans.
No,
I don't
it's just
remember.
that y'all were Yankees and you didn't have the good stuff.
It's probably true. It probably
See, this is even talking about the bottles. Look at that. It's blue. You remember sugar-free Dr. Pepper?
No, I don't. Mine was diet.
All right.
Tab was like the first
Diet, yeah, I do too.
The tab was
And the pink cans. That was a classic line from Back to the Future. Where he's like, I want a tab. And the guy's like, you have to buy something in order to start a tab. And he's like, how about a Diet Pepsi? And he's like, what? Anything that doesn't have sugar in it. He hands him a cup of coffee. There you go. Back to the Future. Just look it up. But you used to drink tab, or you just knew that was the one?
My brother's wives used to drink it while they were like, because their kids were little.
Yeah.
They'd be their kids would be running around in the little pebble pools and all that stuff, and they'd be sitting on the side smoking their cigarettes, drinking their tab.
Yeah. Does anybody remember knee high? I don't think they don't make it anymore, do they? Brandon, you ever heard of knee high? My kids haven't. It's like Fanta. It's all the different fruit flavors of soda. Grape knee high. That was Radar was. Have you ever seen a single episode of MASH?
I don't know, parts of many episodes. It was, I'm sorry, at my grandparents' house though.
Yeah.
You know what? I bet that show, like that wouldn't even fly today. Like some of the stuff they.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it probably would. It probably would.
There's lots of
It was.
Disney now that I like.
It was.
Disney movies and stuff.
It was kind of progressive for its time. I mean, they addressed racism. They addressed.
Stuff you're talking about in South Dakota.
Y'all didn't have the good stuff.
I remember when TV came out.
In South Dakota, was that like the 80s, the 90s?
1880.
1880s. That's right.
Okay. Unbelievable here.
Yeah.
Black and white, and my dad went to town and he'd seen it at one of the stores, and he said, but there was so much snow. And I said, but it's summertime, why is there
Mhm.
snow on the
Yeah.
TV? You know, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And Marshall, you can't say 80s or 90s anymore. Now it's just back in the 1900s.
Way back in the 1900s. That's right. That's what the kids are saying now.
Cody went to a 90s skate night last night, and
Yeah.
like, it's just weird to me that.
Because wasn't that like 5 years ago?
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
I don't like this throwback.
The 90s, a 90s skate night. I'm not sure. What's the 90s look?
Flannels?
I would like to
I would say a flannel.
Yeah, it's like grunge. You can wear grunge.
But then there was also the 90s was the crop tops and the high waist.
Was it like the?
Weren't they skort?
Yeah. Okay.
So like jorts and.
Yeah.
And they make on the.
See. Oh yeah, Fresh Prince kind of look. Yeah.
Backpack was the best thing. He's just like.
Yeah.
So that's, but that's, it's not 80s though. That's
90s.
He went to a 90s party.
Yeah, I know. But
No, that doesn't look like 80s at all.
Fashion is kind of
it's like
reinvented for right now. Like,
yes, stepping
girls
out
are wearing the
and
crop
I
tops
like
and the
what
high
you're doing.
waisted, like so the 90s.
The mom
kind of
jeans.
Come back, yeah.
There was a.
Reinvented. Because I would organize shopping. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody who's
they're coming back.
no, those like early 2000s.
No, it was before that.
You think so? The stirrup pants? I was gonna say early 2000s.
Walmart then at the store, and I started there,
And you were wearing stirrup pants?
which would have been early 90s.
Okay.
I was wearing stirrups.
Man, I was.
Stirrup pants too, so they really come and go. Yeah, mine do. What are stirrup?
I wore jeans and t-shirts the whole time, so I really don't even know what the.
Been like revamped.
Oh, the
Or I may have been late to this fashion game too. I could have been
Where were
wearing
those
those
things?
sometimes.
Like, I remember I was a little bitty. I don't know, soccer shin guards.
Yeah, kinda.
And there's always a debate of, sorry, that's off subject, but like putting the sock underneath the shin guard. Some kids did, and some kids did. Like put the sock underneath the shin guard and
Yeah.
then put the shin guard on, and then put the long socks and pull them down over. the
Right,
shin
that's what you do.
guard. But a lot of people don't do that.
What do they do?
They just wear them on the foot.
Like barefoot and then pull the sock over it?
They just do. that
Well,
always
maybe
bothered
so.
me where it felt.
Yeah,
Like,
because it'd be scratching. Yeah.
it was not fun.
I don't know. My kids play soccer for 1 year. Well, that's not true. Ethan played for a couple, maybe 3, but the other 2. I coached them in micro soccer, which was 3-on-3, very small field, 3-on-3, no goalies. Just the 2 rules were
Be out watching them.
don't touch the ball with your hands and don't push each other down. That was what we worked on.
No, the older 3-on-3 though is a game to watch. It just wears you out because it may have been because the teams I was watching, one of them only had 3 players.
Mhm.
So those 3 players played the whole game.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was constant.
Yeah.
There was no, like with regular soccer, there's somebody over there's got the ball, you can kind of slow down and just take a breath. No.
Yeah.
This one,
No.
3-on-3.
Yeah, but I didn't know anything about soccer. I still don't know the rules. I still don't enjoy watching it. So I know. I just offended a whole bunch of people. I'm not saying it's not a legitimate sport. I'm not saying people shouldn't watch it. I don't watch it. I just don't care.
Okay, here's the true test. Do you see cheerleading as a sport?
No.
See, that's men are that way.
Cheerleading is not a sport.
It is, but you can't do it.
I guarantee you I can't do it. I'm not saying it's not athletic. It's not a sport though. It's more of a because I don't think of like Dancing with the Stars as a sport, right? That's all cheerleading is dancing
Cheerleading is all gymnastics.
and cheerleading and the whole cheerleading thing. They're supposed to be leading cheers, right? Does anybody ever cheer what the cheerleaders cheer? No. The cheerleaders end up following whatever the crowd is doing. Am I right?
Have you ever put someone
Prove me
on
wrong.
there with one foot? I've done that. I feel like that was a sport.
What?
I said I was a cheerleader and we did stunts, and that was a sport.
That is, it's gymnastics.
I'm not saying it's not athletic. I'm not saying I could do any of it.
They compete on the state
I know they do.
national levels, just like
You asked me if I think it's a sport. No, I don't think it's a sport.
That's like, that's like when we were doing virtual schooling back during COVID.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
mostly. Her
Mhm.
English assignment was to give your opinion about something, and she gave her opinion, and the teacher gave her a bad grade because her opinion was wrong.
Yeah. You can't do that.
You cannot do that.
Yeah.
Because if you ask for someone's opinion, and I did,
Yeah. You asked my opinion. I gave you my opinion.
It may be wrong, but it's still your opinion.
It's the wrong opinion, but it's
Good life lesson in business. I don't know.
about what?
Your opinion.
Giving your opinion.
Yeah.
Don't always give your opinion.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. There's either going to be a blow up of comments or a bunch of people clicking off right now. So, yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, this would not be the first time that I've offended people with my perception of cheerleading. So,
Most men don't like cheerleaders.
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I'm not like downplaying. The stuff that they do takes a lot of talent, a lot of skill, a lot of practice. I'm not diminishing that.
So you're doing it off of the definition of sport, probably.
My own personal definition of sport. Yeah. Yeah.
The Marshall Dictionary.
That's right. The Marshall International version translates this as a non-sport. Oh my gosh, we're going to get a definition read to us.
Individual or team competes against another or another's for entertainment. So,
So it's
cheerleading in and of itself wouldn't necessarily be a sport, but when they go to competitions, it would be.
Okay.
Officially.
So
Not to you.
Yeah. Well, if we go back to the original Greek, the word that we translate in English as cheerleading is. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I wouldn't even know.
Going back to the original Greek,
Yes.
in the Olympics,
Yes.
they did not allow women.
Right.
It was all men.
Mhm.
I used to know Olympics. I was telling you about this one. And so when I was on Mount Olympus and they were telling us all these interesting facts, they were saying that there was a year that a woman went, I guess you would say undercover,
Mhm.
and
competed.
competed, and she
Mhm.
won in an area.
Mhm.
And then they found out later that she was a woman, and it was a big disgrace to her family, and I mean, it was just horrible. It was, I can't remember if they just ostracized her, or if they killed her, or what, but it was bad.
Yeah.
So after that, just so men would be sure it was all the Olympic training and all was done.
Was in the nude. Mhm. Yep, I knew that.
Because men want to be the dominant ones.
That's
You
right.
cannot have a bunch of women out there.
Well, that's the way God wanted it, right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah. We're still having audio problems, right? We're still.
Yeah.
I'm totally kidding.
That's why I always heard that the man was the prototype. So God could figure out what exactly he needed.
He messed up, and then he went ahead and created the woman. Yeah. He didn't get it right the first time, so then he created a woman. Yeah.
That's what I always heard.
Yeah. I've heard that too. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of which, let's get into Ephesians. We got out of chapter 5 and into chapter 6, but just to rehash, we're still talking about being a servant. That part of our identity in Christ, as we've been going through Ephesians and finding out all these different things that these different adjectives that can describe us, and we're talking right now about being a servant, that being a person of service is and having a servant's heart is part of our identity in Christ. And we talked quite a bit about the relationship between husbands and wives, and we talked about the mutual submission that is necessary for that to be the kind of relationship that it's supposed to be. It is both the husband and wife looking out for the other person's needs and trying to fulfill those needs. If both people are doing that, not only do needs get met, but we demonstrate love and compassion and kindness for each other as well. We moved into chapter 6 last week, and we talked about the first couple of verses where kids are supposed to obey their parents, but parents, well, specifically fathers, but I think we can assume that both parents are not supposed to, the NIV translation that I use says exasperate their children. They're not supposed to, I think if you guys remember at the end of class, I was talking about how the the Greek word carries with it, like, provoking somebody from uh, like right beside you, somebody that you're close to. So it's really kind of knowing what somebody's buttons are. You know them that well, and you go ahead and push them. Like you know what would make them mad, and so you do that. And why Paul uses that word? Like I don't know that was like a common thing in his culture that parents or maybe just fathers would intentionally provoke their children, unless it was this concept. The only thing that I have, read some other commentaries on and maybe come up, I kind of agree with, is that there was this mindset, again, especially from fathers in this ancient culture. You push kids, you make it hard on them. I can't say it right. It's like extra discipline. You want to make it harder on them so that they will grow up to be, tougher adults that can handle problems and handle different situations. I don't know if that's exactly what Paul is getting at. I'm not for sure. It kind of makes sense if that's what he's addressing. And he may but I think the bigger principle is he's telling parents, you need to submit. You need to submit to your kids, not in a authoritarian way, and giving up your authority and giving in to all your kids' whims, but you need to be looking out for your kids' needs. They need to obey you. They need to be, submitting to you, but you need to not hold that over their heads, not hold that authority over their heads. You need to submit to them and what would be the best. What do my kids need? What would be the best for them? And even as we read that, in our culture nowadays, I think we sit there and go, well, duh. Of course parents would do that. But is that, I guess, and this is where I want to pick up class because this is right at the end of class last week, does that truly describe parenting in our culture nowadays? That we are constantly aware of and trying to meet our kids' needs? Or is that something that we as parents need to work on? I'm asking. Go ahead.
Like in the middle of it all,
Mm-hmm.
the almost 3-year-old, I would say it's something that it's a mindset change, because I think instinctually it's like you're trying to have them submit, and you're like trying to like, well, this is how it happens, and this is why you need to listen, and like that instinct of like, because I said so, instead of like I'm starting to register like, okay, this little 2-year-old's figuring out what emotions are. How do I acknowledge that? How do I? And so, and it kind of ties to that, like the do not provoke your children, because it's sorry, that was like my child thinking. But in the Colossians 3:21 says it's like lest they become discouraged. It's the same thing, but it isn't that. But it's like be worthy of that. And so I try to. It's a mindset of like I'm trying to train myself. I'm parenting for a relationship with my child, not for like I want the respect, but like I want a relationship for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And not you're gonna get this because you're gonna get spanked or whatever, and then like have them fear me. I don't know. Does that make sense? I mean, like I said, I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm like, there's contradictions everywhere. Like I even had a situation with a family member that didn't turn out well, and like them trying to discipline my child, and it was not great.
Right.
And so being in the middle of that, trying to approach it with like understanding, because I get it. Like I get the frustration and I get the reaction, and so I try to. I think we parent so much in the reaction instead of like reflecting and okay, what are they feeling right now besides screaming at me? Maybe there's something else wrong. You know what I mean?
Yes. And sometimes you have to deal with, okay, why are they? You have to react sometimes, and then you have to, yeah. Yeah. There's a. I'm sensing you want to be in the street right now. Let's talk about those feelings.
Sorry, that's why I agree, but I need to. But mostly I'm trying to say, be worthy of the respect. Kind of how I felt. I tried to pull from that because I was like, what does there and be like, this is, oh, I'm
Yeah.
food, I'm gonna take, however, but like, how do I become a worthy parent of my child?
Yeah. Anybody else? I appreciate. No, that was great. That was great. I can't rehash all that for everybody that's listening online, but I mean, wanting the relationship and wanting the respect of your children because they feel loved and protected, and even if it doesn't always go their way,
In a lot of the parenting books, they talk about the difference between being like an
authoritarian.
thank you,
Yes.
and a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Like the dictator, it's just, you're going to do this for fear. You're going to behave out of fear,
Mhm.
not out of because it's the right thing I taught you to do.
Mhm.
Because you're fearing me, you're not, respecting me.
Right.
And so, and a lot of times with the dictator, they tend to respect you less.
Yeah.
And so, it's, I hear what you're saying, and it's very hard because especially like in the moment, like, I mean, like, even as they get older and teenagers, it's because they're acting in the moment too.
Mhm.
Like, and you expect them to have more sense by then. But
Yeah.
they don't.
No, they still want to play in the street and do all the things. So.
Well, also there's a difference between discipline and just trying to make them do what
Like flex your authority.
When you discipline a child, you're just trying to make them see the better way
Mhm.
to do things. But if you're just punishing a child, that to me reflects more on me
Mhm.
than the child.
Mhm.
If I'm just doing it to punish a child, whether it's as a student in class or whether it was my own children, if I'm just punishing them to punish them, that's bad for me.
Mhm.
That's like someone told their dad once, don't spank her while you're mad, while you're angry with her. And he said, well, when I'm not angry with her, I don't want to spank her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
But if you're just doing it to, do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
You need to have disciplines. You're trying to change their way of thinking or that help them see why what they did was wrong.
Mm-hmm. And that there's consequences to their choices.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
But if you're just punishing them.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm thinking of looking at the other side of it now. I see so many parents want to be their best friend,
Mhm.
and they don't discipline them, and they don't, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
She's my friend.
Yeah.
Can't do that to her. I want her to love me. Well, they will love you, but you have to discipline them.
Well, but that was, I mean, you bring up a point. So if not disciplining them because you want them to, to love you, you want to be their friend, doesn't. But Paul says don't exasperate, don't provoke your children to anger. So
How are we defining discipline?
Well, and I think
go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say when you talk about like providing what they need,
Mhm.
as a society, are we giving what they need? I think you have to discern what the need is. They need a parent to set boundaries, but then give them room within the boundaries, and they need parents to discipline them with education and understanding and more shepherding rather than just laying down the hammer. But then there's the flip side of that where you have some parents that aren't providing that, but they're like just taking care of everything, running their stuff up to school
Mhm.
and like not teaching them how to function in
Yeah.
society because they're coddling
Yes.
and not, I don't know, it's like a
Well,
it's
and
like in some ways you're like over providing for the needs while under providing what really needs.
And I think that as the kids grow, and if the parent is like that, where you've done everything for that child, they're not going to respect you. They're going to use you the older they get. And, they're going to, okay, mom will always come to the rescue or whatever the situation is. But I think that there's a fine line of gaining that respect.
Mhm. I think I will say this. As far as looking at this psychologically, some of the kids that grow up to be the angriest teenagers and angriest adults are the ones who didn't have a whole lot of discipline in the home, who didn't have a lot. I shouldn't say discipline, a whole lot of structure, and they grow up feeling unloved and uncared for. Yes, ma'am.
Doesn't the Bible tell us that God disciplines?
for sure. And this is as we're talking about this. Look at the rest of the verse. I know I've been kind of harping on exasperate and provoke to anger, but what does Paul say to do instead? Okay, training. That's discipline. Like it's setting boundaries. It's providing, consequences, rewards and consequences. I'm training them and I'm instructing them in who? I'm instructing them in faith. I'm instructing them in a relationship with God. I'm there. It's not that Paul's not saying, fathers, don't make your kids angry and let them do whatever they want. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, don't just push their buttons like you're talking about. Don't just be a dictator who's constantly disciplining his kids with no purpose behind it. But don't go so far in trying not to do that you let them do anything and everything. You got to kind of find that middle ground. And that's different for all parents. That's different for all kids because they're all different personalities. And, and I think as we're still talking about submission, it's looking out for needs. What do my kids need? Not necessarily what do they want, not necessarily what would they like. What do they need? Sometimes they need me to be a friend. Sometimes they need me to be an authority figure, even if they don't realize that. Sometimes they need safety. Sometimes they need a little bit of freedom. And that's the job, as parents is try to balance that and figure that out. You look like you're wanting to say something. Okay.
It was told to me one time. It's kind of, and this might be a bad example. But you've got when you're thinking about rules and discipline of like, man, I just don't want to. Like, I don't want to put so many rules down. I struggle with that. Of like, I say, no, don't do that. No, don't do that. So many times that I'm realizing, man, like how many times am I like, yeah, let's like explore. Let's think about that. But I mean, think about you got like a fenced-in backyard and you have dogs and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
You can think about rules. Rules is like, you put the dogs in the backyard, or you put the kids in the backyard. Something like, why you gotta oppress me? I got
well, I got this fence around me.
I got this whole world, and you confine me here. But like, if you just had no fence and let them go wherever, then that's more dangerous. But if you have the fence, there's a freedom of like you can. I don't have to keep you right here inside the house, but there's a freedom you can explore and all that within the boundaries that I've deemed are safe.
Right.
And so it's like it's not that keeping rules is bad or anything, but just like these rules are here to protect you and to empower you to have freedom.
Mm-hmm. Which is what. Yeah.
Well, 3-year-old who wants to go out in the street because that's where the party is, man.
Yeah.
Like why would I not want to go in the street? And no matter how many times you tell the 3-year-old, this is what happens, there's no possible way that he could comprehend the effects and consequences. You say the same thing to our teenagers and stuff. Listen, man, like here's these big things, and we set the rules because you know better, because we've walked down some of those roads. But to realize that if you knew where the end of this was, you would understand.
Yeah.
That's why I have the rules, because the party is not where the street is at.
Yeah.
The party is within the safeties of my love, which are also rules.
Which ultimately goes back to this is what God does for us. This is why, the author of Hebrews says, don't get mad when you get discipline from God. Don't get mad when you suffer consequences because you went against something that God wanted you to do. He disciplines those he loves. The reason that the structure is there is for your benefit. Man, we get so frustrated that our kids don't get that. We get frustrated. Kids like, why do you not understand that I'm trying to protect you? How many times do you think God thinks that about us? When we're pushing past his boundaries, and just how often is he going, if you would just, why? Yes, ma'am.
I had a situation with my oldest daughter one time.
Mm-hmm.
There was an after-school party at a friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
Checked out and everything. But then as the party was on, the older brother's siblings came and they were smoking pot.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter called me and said, Mom, come and get me. Well, then her friend, you told your mom? How could you do that? And she said, and to have your mom come and get you, she said, they'd call her. Why no, and she said, would
Mhm.
come and get me.
Yeah.
She knew I didn't want her in that situation.
Yeah. You
And
built
her
that
friends
trust.
couldn't believe it. They said,
Yeah.
there's no way we could tell our mom that.
Yeah.
And I thought, how?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
how?
you had built that trust.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
she knew that.
Yeah.
And she also knew if she was late coming home, she'd be in trouble too.
Yeah.
Because I had something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Came home stuck.
Yeah.
And she was really funny though, from all that smoke in the air, and she just broke up with her boyfriend. And here she is crawling on my lap, makeup running. Oh, but I loved him. I loved him. And her two sisters were saying, "Get her out of here. She stinks."
Oh goodness. Okay. So, just I mean, it goes back again to the mutual submission thing. Um, even as adult children, what do my parents need? How am I honoring them? Honor your father and mother. That doesn't just stop once we get out of the house. I want to find a way to lift them up and to do something for them. And then, you know, parents, honor your kids. Do what you can to meet their needs, and submit to those things, which sometimes means, and you guys know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. You put things on hold sometimes because your kids need you to do something. You put on hold the things that you would prefer to do because of something that your kids need you to do. And that's what Paul is talking about here. And he's just encouraging his parents to keep doing that. But he puts the caveat on it. It's training in a relationship with God. Like that's the direction that we want them to go, is to have that connection, that relationship. Okay. Then he goes on in verse where are we? Verse 5. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no favoritism with him. Okay, so right into a church in ancient Ephesus, first century, and especially in the Roman Empire. Probably, there's some estimates that at its height, there may have been well beyond 50%, maybe even as much as 2/3 of the population of the Roman Empire was slaves, which is amazing, considering that if they had the numbers, you would think that they could, somehow procure their freedom, but that wasn't the case. They were kept in check, and they were, and a lot of the slaves, especially in the Roman and the Greek Empire, they became slaves for a lot of different reasons. Some of them were conquered soldiers. The Romans had conquered some territory, and those people were brought back to their homeland or shipped back somewhere else in the Roman Empire and put into slavery. Sometimes it was somebody who got into a lot of financial debt with somebody else, and so they basically sold themselves. And that happened in Jewish culture too, but they kind of sold themselves into slavery to pay off whatever the debt was. Sometimes it was a generational thing. Parents were slaves. They had kids. Those kids are slaves, and but at least in the Roman culture, you could work your way out of it. You could, serve for a while, and sometimes slaves were even paid money, not very much, but you could work and maybe somehow buy your freedom. You could do something of significance that would kind of win your freedom. Your whoever your master was would grant you your freedom, whatever. So it's just it was a social construct back in this time that most people just accepted as being okay, So it's kind of a hard thing for us to look at now in the 21st century and look back and see, Paul going, okay, slaves, here's how you need to act, and masters, here's how you need to act, and not condemning it, because we look at that nowadays and like, that's just awful. Having slaves is just an awful thing. Treating people as property, why would you do that? Um, and it's an ugly part of our own nation's history that we look back at now and go, that's terrible. But it was so commonplace back in this time, and it kind of, rightfully so, it kind of bothers some of us to look at this and go, okay, why wasn't Paul going, don't do this? Why does he tell masters how to treat slaves instead of telling masters, hey, you need to be done with slaves? Yes, sir, go ahead.
And I think I don't think it's categorically different, but I think it's very, very different because it's easy for us to look within the past 300 years of America, and that's the only way that we can see slavery.
Right.
Which absolutely makes sense. But if you're just talking about the people that Paul is talking to, these indentured servants and slaves and stuff like that, the slaves that we think forcibly taken from their land, and there was you submit to me as my authority. You're not like what we think of as slaves. And I think that this is very, very different. You've got the year of Jubilee.
In the Jewish culture, for sure. Yeah, every 7th year you let your slaves go.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so you've got, if Janet wasn't doing very good financially, then I could say, hey, like, if you work for, like, if you sell me your stuff and work for me as a slave, you've got food, you've got property, and eventually after 7 years she could get that property back, but like, I'm taking care of her. And so in a way, and I'm not justifying this like slavery,
Right.
But like if it was like if Paul said, man, let your slaves go free, I am like letting Janet starve in a way. I don't know. Does that like?
Yeah, it seems. It doesn't seem, for the most part, as harsh a treatment of slaves back in this time as what we've seen, at least in our own nation's history. But I will say this: that's not a hard and fast rule either. I mean, there was abuse of slaves back in this time too, and even if I'm a slave and even if I have a place to live and I'm being provided some kind of quarters, it's not as nice as my master's house, and I'm still at his beck and call, and I don't have any rights. I can't just go into town on my own. I had there's certain rules in society, and I don't have a freedom to go anywhere that I want to, or associate, or even talk to, or even make eye contact with certain people because I'm a slave. So it would be hard, just as again, just as a human being, to be forced into that kind of lifestyle against my will, which is what was happening.
Were they brought in to be slaves, or did they volunteer to be worked?
Both. A lot of them against their will, but like I said, some of them, they chose it.
And what was the 7 year? How did that?
So that was in Jewish culture. The Romans didn't have that. The Greeks didn't have that. Just in the Jewish culture, and to be honest, I would need to look up if they were still even practicing that, by this time. But if you go back in the Old Testament, when God is giving His rules in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it was the year. I guess it was the year of Jubilee. Is that right? Maybe I may be associating something else. Anyway, it was. If you had slaves, they could only work for you for 6 years. On the 7th year, you had to set them free. And I might have even had to supply them with a little bit of something, if I remember right. Yeah, or gave them property they didn't have. But you had to set them free. And his whole reason was, you guys know what it's like to be slaves. Y'all were slaves in Egypt, and you know what it's like to experience freedom. You're going to provide that, for your slaves. Now, I'm coming. I see you. I'm coming. There was also, in the Jewish culture, the opportunity, if a slave wanted to say, I don't want to go be free. I want to stay here. I love my master. I love this life. I want to stay here. And that's where we get the concept of, we used to sing a song called "Pierce My Ear," but they would take them to a doorpost and take a awl and drive, basically pierce, stab a hole in their ear, and usually run like a leather strap or something through it that probably had the the seal, the signet of that particular family, the crest or whatever, branded or stamped on it, and that was just kind of their sign for the rest of their life. I belong to this family. They willingly gave up their freedom to continue to be, a slave for that house. Yes, ma'am.
That was what I was.
Okay.
But also, Abraham had a lot of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Lot had a lot of slaves. And throughout, people of God had slaves.
Oh,
And when
yes.
when God would send them off to defeat some other king, and they would bring those people
They
back
bring
as
slaves back. Mm-hmm.
So, I think that the thing is, we're just, I kind of think we only look at it, like you said, from the 1860s.
Yeah.
What was slavery like in the United States, which didn't last nearly as long as it did in biblical times.
Right.
It ended. But I think that we don't. Slavery must. I don't know. I just kind of think it back then wasn't quite like what the 1860s were.
Maybe so. Yes, ma'am.
In the Roman culture,
Mhm.
were slaves primarily acquired through war conquest, or I mean, like America had slave ships.
Right. Right.
And brought them back.
It was both. It was both. It was conquered territories, and they would send conquered soldiers back, but they would also like similar to what happened to Israel when the Babylonians took them over. Like they captured and shipped them off. The Romans would capture this group of people, and they would keep some of them there to farm the land and all that kind of stuff. But they would also take even women and children and ship them back to somewhere else in the Roman Empire to be slaves. It was just both. It was.
You would think, if you were to set them free after 7 years, they don't have the funds to go back home.
Sure, that would be an issue, and that's what Brandon was talking about. Like sometimes you're stuck. Like I've got my freedom now, but what do? I don't have any money. I don't have anything of my own, and that's why I would have to go back and look because I didn't read it ahead of time. I can't remember in God's law if there was some kind of. I feel like there was at least some money. There was something that you had to. You didn't just set your slaves free, but you provided them with something to kind of get a kickstart in life, But there's part of this I think we wrestle with sometimes. Just maybe I just talk about me personally. Maybe I try to justify it in my own mind sometimes of like, well, it wasn't as bad, and it's still slavery. I wouldn't want, even if I had a roof over my head and a place to sleep. I mean, let me interrupt myself. Spring break. Christy and Tyson and I went to Washington, D.C., and we went to Mount Vernon, which is probably the third, maybe fourth time that I've been there. And you go and look at the slaves' quarters, and like there's even stories talking about how well George Washington treated his slaves. Maybe so compared to other slave owners. But I still go and look at where they live compared to the house that he lived in. And they're piling 15 people into a room half this size, and they're having to put 3 people per bed. And, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's still not the most desirous position to be in. But it's uncomfortable, at least, if not worse. It's at least uncomfortable to see it not necessarily endorsed by Paul, but definitely not condemned. And what do we do with that? Or is that a problem? Maybe it's just not a problem. Huh? For sure.
Do you think that it's, because I feel like there's a lot of points where God works with what choices humans have made.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that that's what's happening? Where it's like, this is already happening, so how does God work in that?
Like with
Right.
divorce.
Yes.
What he said.
Yeah.
Because of the hardness of your heart.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what's going on here. And that's
It's not like
I-
you're saying like everyone has their, like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's a choice
Yeah, Abraham.
It's confusing though because if all sins are equal, it's almost like you're finding a way to work with this one, but this
Mhm.
is evil.
Mhm.
And there's other ways, it's not addressed a way to work with it.
Mhm.
Well,
We're
that's
not
what I
finding a
struggle
way,
with, I
like we're
think,
not
is
finding
that
a way to address
this
working
seems
with
to be like whatever, but then there's like other areas where he condemns things that I
Yeah.
feel are less, I'll say simple, but less, like, to me, this is like this
Heavy, yeah.
heavy, yes, like
Mhm.
deprivation of human rights and,
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like
I don't know,
finding a
but
way
then
to
there's-
work with slavery, which is horrible.
Mhm.
We're not finding a way to work with homosexuality, which, like, some could say is loving.
Mhm.
and consensual.
Mhm.
Like, this is
Right.
not consensual,
Mhm.
slavery's not.
I mean,
Mhm.
I'm just thinking.
Oh, I know.
It's weird. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around.
Mhm. I think this is one of those things. I don't have a complete answer for it, and I've probably wrestled with it more now than I used to. But I do think it's God working within, and Paul in this case, working within um, the parameters of what was socially acceptable, uh, even if it wasn't completely endorsed by God. And I think there are things. We talked about the divorce thing before. God specifically says, "I hate divorce." Well, that seems pretty straightforward, and yet God says, "Okay, if you're going to get divorced, here's how you need to do it." And He kind of sets some parameters for it. I can't find anywhere in Scripture where, and it may be there. I'm saying I can't think of a place in Scripture where God says, "I love slavery, and I hope you take away human rights from another group of people." I don't see that anywhere, but it's another situation where I think God is like, "Okay, I know you're going to, so here's what that's going to look like. Here's the parameters of that, because I know you're going to anyway." Does that make it right? I don't think so. And I think, in the course of human history, we finally figured out that's not the right thing to do. And we've gotten to a place where human beings as a whole recognize that's wrong. It just took us a while to get there.
Does it say somewhere where in the Bible about like David with having so many wives? I mean, why was that okay?
I don't think it was. I don't think God ever. I think God allowed. Again, same kind of thing. God allowed multiple wives. There's nowhere in Scripture where God, you know, necessarily said, "Please, you can't find a place where He told Solomon go marry 700 women." Like that was Solomon's choice, and there were consequences of that. Like it really created some pretty big problems in Solomon's life. I don't think that was God's design. I think when back all the way back in the very beginning in Genesis, when He says, "A man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and those two people, will be one flesh." That's supposed to be it. Um, but are there rules in place? Are there allowances for multiple wives? Looks like it. You know. She had concubines would have some of the same rights and privileges, but not all. Um, she was more like a mistress. Hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Well, just to kind of get us back to this right
Mhm.
now, in this particular part of Ephesians, Paul is addressing family relationships.
Hmm.
So he's talked about the wives, the husbands, the children. The slaves were part of that household.
Hmm.
So right here, I don't think he's either condoning or condemning slavery. He's just saying, just like wives are to submit to their husband, husbands love your wife, fathers don't provoke your children, masters treat your slaves like this. I don't think this is necessarily him saying, okay, you can have slaves, but you have to treat them.
Right. I would agree with you. I don't think this is Paul uh, condoning but again, this is what we wrestle with. But he's not condemning. But he's not condoning slavery. He's just saying, okay, if you find, and it's really like, and he does this in other places too. Honestly, I'll give you a quick example that's just popped in my head just now. In the book of, we went through this a couple weeks ago with our young adults group. In the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul is talking about the resurrection. There's some people who are thinking that the resurrection isn't actually going to happen. And he's saying, well, if the resurrection doesn't happen, isn't going to happen, that changes everything. And he's giving some examples of why. He's like, if the resurrection isn't real, then the resurrection of Christ isn't real, and he's still in the grave, and this whole Christianity thing is a waste of time. But then he goes on with a couple of other examples. And one of those, he says, if people are baptized for the dead, well, what's the point if there's no resurrection? Now, that's the only time baptism for the dead is mentioned anytime in Scripture. Anytime. And it's not that Paul is saying that people should baptize for the dead. And it's not that Paul is... Nobody knows for sure. I shouldn't have brought it up, man. That's my own fault. Those of you watching online, get comfortable. No, I'm just kidding. No, there's even different theories as exactly what was happening. So there are some that think just, there was something happening in Corinth where people were saying they could get baptized on behalf of someone who had already died that wasn't Christian, and they could, in some form or fashion say, I am being baptized on behalf of Papa, and now he gets to go to heaven, because I got baptized on his behalf. Does that make sense? And there are religious groups that still do that nowadays. Yeah, depending on how many family members you want to get. Anyway, my whole point was there's nowhere else in Scripture that even talks about it. And even there, it's not Paul saying you should baptize for the dead and, or, hey, this is a really bad idea. He's just using the example. If you are baptizing for the dead and there's no resurrection, then that's pointless. Why are you even doing that if there's no resurrection? Y'all with me? So I think this is kind of what Paul does sometimes, even here with slavery. It's not that he's championing slavery and saying people should have slaves, and he's not taking the opportunity to condemn it either. He's just addressing where people are in their lives. I'm talking to people who are married. If you're married, wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, submit to your wives. I'm talking to people who are parents and who are children. Children, submit to your parents. Parents, submit to your kids' needs. I'm talking to people who are slaves and masters. It's not for or against. Just if you're in that situation. Slaves, here's how you need to act. Masters, here's how you need to act. Does that make sense? I'm with probably a lot of you. I wish that Paul would have taken the opportunity to go, slaves, man, this is wrong. And I hope it changes. But since you're in this situation, here's how you need to act. Even if he had just said that, I feel a whole lot better, But he doesn't. But again, I don't think that's his point right now. I don't know what Paul's opinions were on slavery. We don't have that anywhere in Scripture. He's just addressing, this is where you are, so here's how you act in the situation that you're in. Does that make sense? And I think that's all he's getting at here. So, slaves, be the best slave that you possibly can. Submit to your masters. Submit to them as if that's God that you're working for right there. Because in essence it is. And that's what he goes on to say. You need to understand your ultimate master is Jesus. And so what does Jesus call us to do? He calls us to love. He calls us to serve. He calls us to forget, to be compassionate, all these different things. So go do that. Because that's who our ultimate master, that's what we're called by him to do. Now, masters, how do you treat these slaves? Again, we wish he would go, masters, set your slaves free. But he doesn't. Okay? What does he say? How do we treat them? Treat them really well. Don't threaten them. Treat your slaves what did he say? Treat your slaves in the same way. Well, what's the same way? What did you just get done talking about with the slaves? Okay, which is really foreign to the whole concept of masters when it comes to their slaves, right? The whole reason I have a slave is because I can tell a slave what to do. But he spends a paragraph telling slaves how to serve, how to meet the needs of their master. And he tells masters, do the same thing for your slaves. And there would be people in this church who have slaves. Maybe some of them sitting there, or maybe at the back of the room. I don't know what the situation was with them. It would be so alarming to hear that, to hear Paul, to hear those words. Masters, do the same thing for your slaves. Masters don't submit to slaves. Yeah, but you need to. What would make their life easier? What do they need from you? How can you treat them with compassion? How can you treat them with kindness? How can you at least keep from threatening them and domineering over them? Yes, ma'am.
It says, whatever good anyone does, he receives the same reward, whether he is a slave or free. So that's kind of saying, in God's sight, you're equal.
Yeah. Well, he goes on to say that in verse 9. The reason that you do that, you know that he who is both their master and yours. So what's he saying to these masters? You got a master too. And he's their master, he's your master. And ultimately, you submit to his will. Mm-hmm.
We can't think of ourselves better than someone else.
Right. Because the last sentence he says there is, God doesn't have favoritism. God sees you and your slaves as on the exact same level. So, treat them with the same compassion and servant's heart that I'm calling them to treat you with. Now, how does this, just real quick, because we're going to run out of time. We don't have slaves and masters nowadays. So how does this apply to us now? Because we got wives and husbands, we got parents and kids, we got.
Would it be the law of man?
What do you mean?
Like authoritative people, like police officers, or like that.
That could be part of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody that's.
Like I can't, decisions that you can't make, like can't murder.
Yeah. Yeah. Law enforcement kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's kind of how I do. Like it's like,
Yep.
who has authority over me that's on earth? Like,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it kind of like employers and employees. I know that's not the same because the slaves didn't have any kind of rights or anything, but that principle to me is there. If you've got people working under you, don't make it hard on them. Treat them with compassion, treat them with respect. You've got a boss over you too, but as an employee, man, how much do we want to gripe about our managers? Oh my goodness. I walked right into that one. Yeah. Boy. Isn't God your boss, Lori? Yeah. But I think that's kind of the principle that we can look at nowadays, just whatever work relationship that I'm in. Although, I think you could apply it to law enforcement. It's just anybody that's got a position of authority over me, I need to submit to that. I need to not make their job hard. Could be. Mm-hmm. Give honor to whom honor is due. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's a story that I'll give the quick version of it that I've read before of it. A guy that was a zookeeper in the Los Angeles Zoo back in the 70s and 80s, who had a manager over him that he could not stand, just hated the guy. And everything that he did, he was bitter about it. He did it, angrily. He would talk bad about the guy behind his back. And then he's talking with another fellow zookeeper at one time who was having some issues, with his marriage and stuff going on at home. And he's like, man, you should think about, talking to God about that. You should, do you have a relationship with God? Is that something that you even have? And he's like, I never want to do that because all Christians are hypocrites. And he's like, well, I'm not a hypocrite. And he's like, And he's like, I've seen the way you act towards this guy. I've heard the things you said about him. And and the guy was like, you're right. That story comes to my mind when I look at this, and I know there's been times when I've been very, not just verbally, but just in my actions, very disrespectful towards people who have some kind of authority over me. I haven't made their job easy. I know I've told you about my teachers. That's one. But this is what Paul is. It would be difficult for both of these groups to hear this. It would be a challenge for him. For him to tell slaves, do your job with joy. You have to do it out of obligation because that's the situation that you're in. But do it with a smile on your face and do it in a way where you want to be a blessing to your master. And the same challenge for us. Do your job in a way, even if you don't like the person that you're working for, you're trying to be the best person you can for them and be the best employee that you can. As a master, I can call the shots. I can do whatever I want. I can treat that person any way I want to. Yeah, but don't. Treat that person in a way that is a blessing to them, that they feel loved and cared for and that their needs are being met. It would be foreign to both groups, and yet it's what Paul challenges both of them to. So let's wrap up because next week we're going to get into the armor of God. So I'll say this. What Connie was saying a minute ago is what I'll draw our attention back to one more time. Everything that we talked about for the last couple of weeks, wives and husbands, parents and kids, slaves and masters, all goes back to Ephesians 5:21. Everything that he says from Ephesians 5:22 to Ephesians 6 verse 9 is connected to Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. I am submitting my will to Jesus Christ. And because I'm doing that, I'm going to submit my will to other people, to family, to coworkers, to neighbors, to fellow church members, to spouses. I'm going to ask myself first and foremost, what does that person need? How can I be a blessing to them? That's the first question. And the reason I'm doing that is out of not just respect for Christ, but out of the reverence is not just a respect thing. It's recognizing that's what Jesus does for me. And I want to reflect that. I want to honor what he's done for me by trying to meet the needs of other people and submitting to them. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
Thought of the song we sing, "Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay."
Uh-huh.
I think you can maybe apply that in a way to this.
Sure.
We submit to other people out of our love for Jesus.
You're right. We often think of have thine own way. We often think of surrendering to Jesus' will as far as like his direction for our life. Where am I going to work? Where am I going to live? What kind of career am I going to have? What volunteer opportunities do I need to join in? But sometimes his will is for me to go bless somebody that I would have a hard time actually blessing. For me to forgive somebody that's done something really mean to me. For me to be kind to somebody who really doesn't deserve my kindness. That's his way as well. And submitting to that, it takes effort. This isn't something that happens automatically, which I think is why Paul spent so much time on it. This isn't natural. Submitting to one another, that's unnatural. But that's what we're called to do because that's what Jesus did for us. Yes, sir.
To think about the slaves and masters and stuff. The book of Philemon.
That's what I've been thinking.
Yeah. No, it's just like when that goes bad, so the slaves and masters when that goes bad, and then the book of Philemon is the redemption of that too.
Yeah.
So little short book, you need a lot of context to like.
Yeah.
It's like the most personal like. Here's a lot of events that happened before I wrote this, but like it's super good of like Paul just explaining like here's something that went bad, but like here's where God redeems slaves and masters of the same thing too.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask chronologically,
Mm-hmm.
which came first.
Philemon was written about the same time as this. So it's another one of the prison letters. So Paul wrote Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon all from his prison cell. So all about the same time. As a matter of fact, geographically, where he was at and where these letters ended up, it's quite possible that whoever carried this letter to the Ephesians also carried the letters. It could have even been, well, we know Onesimus carried his own letter to Philemon because that was his master and he was carrying it back to him. But Philemon was associated with that church in Colossae because he mentions him, I think, in that letter, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, but that's a whole slave and master thing. Like he's sending Onesimus back, and there's potential for Onesimus. I mean, it's death penalty. He ran away from his master. He could,
And successfully.
yeah, didn't even have to go back. Yeah, and Paul's kind of buttering him up a little bit, in that letter, and like, hey, Onesimus is now a Christian, and I know you are, and so let's all be Christian in how we handle this. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you for your time today. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
So I have someone who can do childcare on Tuesdays.
Uh huh.